Let's start our last but one session, session number 7, that in which we will look at more of kind of the relations between domestic and international finance, and then we will look at some of the flows that international flows that come from international community to the region in terms of climate-related finance. We will also hear about a very interesting development in Georgia about the steps that the National Bank of Georgia, Central Bank, took in order to create a framework for the commercial banks to take action. We'll have also very interesting presentations from Kazakhstan about the institutional setup for green finance, and also some policy developments. And then finally, we will also hear from our colleagues from the OECD, who will present the results of the very recent study that identifies some lessons learned from mobilizing private finance in developing countries. So let's then compare whether how those findings relate to challenges in the region of the EU, Eastern Partnership, and Central Asia. I have a pleasure to invite our OECD colleague, Giorgio Gualberti, who is coming from the OECD Development Cooperation Directorate. And Giorgio will present to us some of the very interesting findings of the OECD work on tracking climate finance. Giorgio.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Good morning to all the colleagues here, and also to the colleagues online. It's a great honor to be with you here. So we have a short presentation, actually, on some data. So it's super boring, so stay with me just a few minutes on what development finance institutions, bilateral, multilateral donors are doing in Eastern partner countries and Central Asia, particularly on climate and climate-related development finance. So first of all, let's look a moment at the general picture. I mean, what are we talking about? We're talking about climate-related development finance. What is climate-related development finance? So these are bilateral activities and multilateral activities that have some climate objectives, so that they are stated, they support mitigation, or they support adaptation, or both, of course. So this is in all sectors. We can have climate in all sectors, and it can be concessional and non-concessional. So it's called ODA-like, but also activities that are from development finance institutions that are more or less at market rates. And so this includes two things that are similar, but not exactly the same. One is climate-specific data, particularly from multilateral institutions, and one is climate-related data from bilateral donors. What is the difference? In the case of this region, most of the activities, we will see it in few moments, are from multilateral. So this is not that much of a difference. But the point is that there are some activities from bilateral donor, including European institutions, that have an objective of having a significant objective of climate change. That means that the climate change is the secondary objective and not the first objective. So last thing, all the data I'm showing here to you now is commitments. And let's look at what it looks like, the development support for this region. So first of all, let's have a moment looking between 2013 and 2021. We see two periods, essentially. A first period between 2013 and 2018 that was about 3.2 billion per year. This is for all the countries we are talking about. Then in 2019, it's much more. and it goes a little bit down in 2020 and 2021. But we can say that in the last 3 years, it has been roughly 4.9 US billion, of course, in constant prices per year. Other two things are important that we can see from this chart is that mitigation activities prevail. So there is much more mitigation than adaptation or cross-cutting. That is that little slice between there. And then also MDB finance prevails. So around 67% of the finance is actually from multilateral development banks. Then we can also say that in this chart, sometimes you have in the data few large commitment. For example, support from one large power plant, and that can be 1 billion. And so that could be an episodic high in the, for example, one very high billion is there in 2019 from a gas power plant project. So looking instead at the data per country, this is just 2020, 2021, and from now on we just speak about the latest 2 years. We have the countries that received more development finance are Ukraine and Uzbekistan, and in both cases also mitigation is the highest part. Then if you look at per capita terms, instead, it's quite different, because Georgia is the one receiving more in per capita terms. It's on the right side of the screen, the scale, and followed by Kazakhstan. Then the other thing that we can see is that Tajikistan is the only country in which there is a more equilibrium between adaptation and mitigation, because the projects are of course different for each country, and maybe we can see some example in few slides. Then here we are looking at the sectors. So energy is of course the most important sector in this support for sustainable net zero transition that development partners are giving to these East Asian countries, and particularly, for example, in Armenia, but also in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan, and also in other countries. But there are some countries in which the sector that is more supported by development partners are different. For example, we have transport in Azerbaijan, we have agriculture in Kazakhstan, and we have government and civil society in Turkmenistan. So it's not always energy. That's what I'm saying. I mean, what we see now is statistics, is bar and charts, but the reality behind that is that there is a multitude of different projects that support the governments and public institutions of these countries. So if we look at the channel, as I said, it's mostly about the public sector. So 70% of all these is channeled through the public sector, almost 70%, while almost 30% of it are channeled by the private sector. That means that there are loans that goes directly to the private sector to implement possibly some public policies or infrastructures or this kind of things. There are some exceptions. Armenia and Ukraine have a larger private sector share, and also and for Turkmenistan it's very high, the share of multilateral institutions. Of course, this is just 2 years, and in 2 years it's sufficient. As I said, you have one large project that changed this share considerably, but we choose to show you what's really the latest data. So who are the donors on these sectors and on this country? So the first, it's quite concentrated. There are not many, and some give a relatively large amount of financing. So we have that EBRD and the World Bank together they account for more than 50% of the total. And then it's followed by European Investment Bank, France, Asian Development Bank, and others, Germany, Japan, and other EU institutions, excluding the European Investment Bank. So, I mean, it's really few large actors that are doing most of that are committing most of the financing in those countries. So we talk a little bit about concessionality, non-concessionality. We said that this data is about both concessional and non-concessional, but how much? Mostly is non-concessional, meaning that multilateral development banks here, they have the lion's share, and most of the financing from multilateral development banks, you can see that the big in the middle, it's non-concessional.
Natasha.
Sorry.
Sorry, can we ask the participants would like to be muted?
We have time for question after, and we are happy to take questions. So, in general, the difference is that what is happening is that multilateral institutions, they can raise money on the international market, and they can lend money, of course, in non-concessional rates. While DAC donors, DAC members, so OECD countries to a certain extent, they provide concessional resources more, and also more grants. But of course, the total amount of these concessional resources is limited, because that depends on the budget of the governments of OECD DAC members. Then another slide on concessionality, because that's I'm sure it's something that interests many, is that if you look at country by country, the profile are quite different, if you see, no? So we have, for example, that Kazakhstan and Ukraine are the least, are receiving the least concessional amount of development finance, while others like Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, please excuse my pronunciations, I beg your pardon, are the ones that are receiving most concessional resources. So what is behind all this? This is my last slide, so I will then, I'm happy to answer questions. These are the 10 largest projects in 2020-21, and sorry if the visualization is not ideal. But so the first largest projects I actually found is a project on Ukraine on public buildings energy efficiency. So I wonder if this is something that is linked to the experience that the colleague from Ukraine, Maria, was talking just before me in the previous session. Exactly. Then we have also urban public transport, also in Ukraine, both from the European Investment Bank, with a project from the World Bank in Kazakhstan on sustainable livestock. That means also, that sustainable transition and net zero transition is not only about energy and trains, but we also have a lot of energy and trains, because we have development support in Uzbekistan from Japan, another project from France to Uzbekistan on general climate and environment public policies, and from Georgia, very similar also project. Then we have a couple of railway electrification projects in Uzbekistan, and in Uzbekistan, both of them. Then we have a power sector reform in Uzbekistan, and another energy efficiency public policy in Georgia from France. So what we can see from this is that there are several instruments, there are few donors, and the sustainable, the development finance to the net zero transition and general sustainable development is quite, touches many sectors. And that was very, very brief outlook and picture of this. I hope this stimulates your curiosity. Of course, we have all this data is public. There is extremely low font link in this presentation, but of course this will be shared with members, and you can find all the data online, so you can dig into that. And in case you have curiosity or issues about the data, I can respond to some now, and of course by email, I will be very happy to continue the conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. It was extremely interesting to see some of those trends in terms of flow of international climate finance to the region. And sadly, yes, there are questions asked why the 2020 was high compared to previous ones, which 2019. And then the COVID came. Then the reduction was rather small, relatively small. That's an interesting trend that we've observed. So that's one. Certainly, there are specific projects behind the data. So that's what you said, and it's certainly interesting that this database that is provided by the OECD is an open source. Everyone could access. So certainly that can provide a possibility to dig in further and then to find some interesting information and identify the ingredients of the charts. That's very interesting. I wonder if there are any questions from colleagues from the floor about. Yes, Solène, please.
Just a quick question. Could you give a definition of the concessional funds, because it wasn't that clear? Thank you.
Yeah, it's another question. Please.
Thank you. My name is Malhaz Adeshvili. I'm from Georgia, National Coordinator of the EU for Environment Program. I had an opportunity to work on climate financing in Georgia in recent years, and I personally faced a number of problems which I would like to ask you to help me to clarify. First problem was related to the terminology, how we define climate finance. I'm sure there are some methodologies, but I couldn't simply find that methodology. I know that OECD is working on that, but the problem that I faced is maybe the donors, how they define the climate projects or climate-related projects are different from how countries perceive climate financing. Because when I compare donor or OECD data on climate financing in Georgia, and when I compare it to the real data received, I mean real financing received or spent by Georgia, there is a big gap between what is reported by international organization or multilateral banks and the data that we have in Georgia at the country level. Yeah, that's one problem. Second problem is how we could interpret that Georgia received, for example, 0.8 approximately billion US$ for climate financing in 2020, 2021. Are these new and additional funds approved for Georgia, or are these cumulative funds? Or the problem is that there's also a big gap between availability of committed funds for climate financing in Georgia and actual spending of the funds. So this little bit confuse experts and politicians to understand what's the real situation. Thank you very much. If you provide some guidance, that would be very good.
Giorgio, please.
Thank you very much to both. Actually, super interesting question. So the first one is more easy to answer because we have a clear-cut definition about that. Although it's not perfect, I cannot give you a perfect answer because for bilateral donors, so for OECD DAC members, there is an ODA definition. And in ODA definition, there is a certain concessionality level that depends also from the income country. So it depends from the discount rate that you can use that varies by country. and the definition is online, and so the same loan can have a different concessionality if it is given to a lower income countries or is given is a lower grant element if it's given to a higher income countries or lower income countries.
Yeah, just so basically, there are grants and there are soft loans, and
Yes.
you call it concessional funding.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Grant and soft loans are concessional.
Okay, thank you.
And now the OECD counts overall. I mean, the data I showed you are outflows, are commitments, outflows, gross commitments. But the overall ODA data now is given in grant equivalent. So there is a calculation to transform everything in a homogeneous way. And that's but that's for bilateral. For multilateral, that depends on the financing window, essentially. So there are multilaterals that have a concessional financing window and also a non-concessional financing window. For example, the World Bank, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the International Development Association. One gives only concessional finance and the other does not. So that's it. For what the answer for climate financing, that's a much more complicated, because the real point here is that there does not exist at the UNFCCC level a definition about this is climate finance 1, 2, and 3, and this is not climate finance. Okay, so even here we have anyway some working definition that are put out at the UNFCCC level, and we have on the data. So the multilateral part is defined as climate finance through an MDB climate finance methodology. So there is an MDB definition about saying this is climate finance in this sector in these cases. Okay. And this is also public, and the data that you see here takes only into account that climate finance, meaning that if I give a loan to Georgia of 100 million, it could be that just 20% of it is climate finance, because the World Bank says that it's that. And that's one thing. And bilateral donors that you see here account for the world projects. So they say this part is as a principal objective of climate, and this part is a significant objective of climate. And then they transform this data when they send it to the UNFCCC. But there are, of course, discussions on trying to improve this, and the system is clearly has some limitation. But what you said about actual spending, about what countries perceive, is very true. Because I mean, one thing is what you saw here is commitment, and then for this to be transformed in disbursement and to be actually moved to the field, well, sometimes it takes years, and that's clearly something that needs to be shortened. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for these clarifications. Otherwise, first time when I read that Georgia received for climate financing, for climate programs, something like more than 20 billion Georgian liras since 2013 or something, I was shocked. I was shocked because I know the scale of climate change projects in Georgia. But then when I dug up, I found out that this thing is different from what I thought about. Yeah, thank you very much. And this message should be conveyed to politicians and decision makers at country level, I think. It's not only my interest as a person or as an expert, but this should be conveyed to politicians also. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Angela, please.
Thank you, Angela Balaga, European Commission. Just to continue this discussion, in fact, when we, let's say, at the operational level, try to use real markers that afterwards will be reflected in the OECD database, those markers are used not only when we have purely climate projects. Those markers can be used for other projects as well. and probably nowadays, and increasingly so, the bulk of funding will be because of climate mainstreaming, not necessarily projects that are purely climate or environmental. So this might be one of the reasons behind those very high figures. I'll be happy to discuss also bilaterally afterwards. But the use of markers is following quite strict rules when we donors report on funding, and of course it's subject of continuous improvement. I'll have a question about new instruments and how they are reflected in the database. For instance, guarantees or blending. How do you treat this information? Thank you.
Thank you. So there is some, I didn't show this in this presentation, but there is some data on blending, on private finance mobilized. That is also some climate component. And all this data, again, is online on the OECD website. There is a view on our main entry point for statistics. That is OECD.stat, and there you can go and look at mobilization and mobilization for climate, and you have all the projects by country, with the caveat that data for mobilization, there are some more strict confidentiality rules. So while for concessional activities from DAC members, but also multilaterals, you find everything. For private finance mobilized, well, some data is aggregated, some data is lacking some details because these are the rules. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? And while you're thinking, also, I should say that Georgia presented us the statistical side of what the Development Cooperation Directorate is doing, but there is also a vast analytical element that is actually then trying to understand what's behind the data, and then there is a separate work and on blending finance. Then there is there are different streams of activities that basically try to understand what the data tells us. And then also there's another element of what you just mentioned, that the data and the analysis is also being used to improve it. So it's not a static situation, is that there is a constant improvement of the data collection and making sure that what's reported is actually showing the real life situation as much as possible. So certainly we could have a separate presentation about this other part, but I think it was very interesting to see this kind of the background for the discussion, which is the statistics. So Georgia, thank you very much then for your time and sharing. And then I would invite certainly everyone to look into the presentations will be available. So please click on that link and then see what's more there. And then Georgia, I hope you wouldn't mind if some participants will follow up with you and ask some additional questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now let's then go to the second presentation, and then I have a pleasure, and then actually the three presentations from now on will be online, and I hope that we have Salome Tvalodze online. Let's hear if Salome is with us.
Yeah, I'm here. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, okay. So Salome, thanks very much for joining. And then we'll be certainly very happy to hear from you about the National Bank of Georgia work on green regulations for the commercial banking sector. So please go ahead.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm really sorry that I was not able to be here with you in person. So today, as for the presentation, I would like to share some updates and developments on our sustainable finance framework. So if you could next slide, please. Yeah, great. So before explaining in detail recent developments, I just want to mention that we started developing sustainable finance framework in 2017. And within this framework, we have 4 main pillars that is defined and explained in our roadmap for sustainable finance in Georgia. So these 4 pillars are first, supporting capacity and awareness raising. Second, concentrate on sustainable finance flows and sustainable market development. Next one is about ESG integration and risk management, and last one is about transparency and reporting. So today I would like to concentrate more on second and third pillars and talk about both regulatory developments as well as market dynamics in this direction. So if you could move to the next one. Yeah, thanks. So if I may start with the sustainable finance market development and how we can support redirection of capital flows towards more green, social, and sustainable activities, and to share with you what we have done in terms of regulatory framework. Like it's like, I guess it's a good transition from previous discussion, because there was like discussion about definitions and how important it is to have a clear understanding what we mean by climate finance or green or sustainable and social. Because like clear definitions is really important, because we cannot talk about sustainable finance product or sustainable finance market and how we can support this kind of market development if we don't agree what we mean by green, social, or sustainable. So, and it's also very important to avoid greenwashing, right? So track progress and so on. So having this in mind, we developed sustainable finance taxonomy for Georgia that was published August last year. And I won't spend time to explain what taxonomy means. I guess we all know that by now. But I just want to highlight that in case of Georgia, sustainable finance taxonomy consists of green and social taxonomies. So we have a dedicated social taxonomy, separate one. And together with the taxonomy, we published a regulation on loan classification and reporting according to the sustainable finance taxonomy for commercial banks. Because in case of Georgia, like main part of the financial sector, like around 95% is commercial banks. So first application of the taxonomy is for commercial banks. And this regulation entered into force in January this year. And it has 2 main parts, or 2 main requirements. First of all, it sets common definition of green, social, and sustainable loans in Georgia. So, and the commercial banks cannot use these words, green, social, and sustainable loans, unless it is aligned with the Georgian taxonomy. And the second main requirement is reporting requirements. So starting from January 2023, banks are reporting on a monthly basis on the taxonomy aligned green portfolio. And we are currently working on green, social, and sustainable bonds framework, and that will be based again on the taxonomy, and will set rules and regulations for issuing green, social, and sustainable bonds in Georgia. It's ongoing, and we expect to have this document by end of this year. So if we could move to the next slide, please. This is like the regulatory framework. So now we have common definition, we have common classification system. So let me now share with you how sustainable finance or green finance market is developing in Georgia. So before having this taxonomy, commercial banks were reporting according to their own definitions, and we see from these figures that green loans have been increasing in Georgia in recent years, and in 2022 we saw like 15% increase compared to previous year, and the total amount of green loans amounted to 1.4 billion gel, and it's about 3.2% of total portfolio. But again, here I want to mention that these figures underestimates the real volume of green loans because not all banks are reporting on their green portfolio because they don't have um, this in place, this green, so they don't do the like they don't have information on their green loans because they don't issue just or track their green portfolio. But these numbers are aggregate numbers, annual numbers, and what taxonomy gave us is monthly data, detailed monthly data according to the sectors. So the next slide is first result of taxonomy adoption. As we can see, as of July 2023, the total amount of taxonomy aligned green loans amounted around 400 million euro, and 63% is issued to renewable energy products. Another, again, these numbers again underestimate because not all commercial banks have started to implement taxonomy, and those who started are still in the process. And here comes the challenges related to the implementation of the taxonomy, right? Because it requires time and resources to implement taxonomy. It's not an easy one. We try to make taxonomy as simple as possible, of course, aligned with international standards, but still to be like more practical. But still, it requires expertise and technical knowledge to screen loans against technical standards that are given the taxonomy. And not all commercial banks, and I would say most of the commercial banks, don't have in-house expertise to do this kind of check. And then another challenge is a lack of demand from private sector to green loans. Because again, and this is somehow related to lack of awareness about importance of green activities. And all this comes show that while some banks are already implementing taxonomy and we see increasing numbers from month to month, still there are some challenges in the implementation process. And now we are trying to see and analyze what we can do in the future to support more broad adoption of taxonomy and to support sustainable finance market development in Georgia. Because so far we don't have any incentives, like we don't have regulatory incentives, and there's no green incentives from the government as well. So it's only up to banks to issue green loans and to start implementing taxonomy. And it's like reflected on their reputation, but it's good for them. And we also always say that it's good for the company and to show and for the reputation. But I guess more involvement or more support is needed to further advance this market. And on the next slide, I also wanted to show that even though we have not adopted green or sustainable and social bond framework yet, we see some good developments in bond market as well, especially in the last couple of years. In previous years, Georgian companies issued green loans in foreign exchange markets, foreign stock exchanges, sorry, but in last 2 years, we see issuance in local stock exchange, and we are very happy about that. And now we have like first green bonds issued in Georgian market, both in USD, but in local currency as well. And we have sustainability linked bonds, gender bonds, social bonds. So overall, like 10 GSS for plus bonds issued by Georgian companies. And we expect that once we will have this bond framework in place, this will further support this market development. So this is like more of a sustainable finance market and sustainable finance flows. So next, I would like to talk about the second, third pillar, that is about ESG integration and risk management, including climate. And this is also very important, especially for from financial stability perspective. And actually, this was ESG integration, and the requirements regarding ESG integration was one of the first things that we did when we started developing our sustainable finance framework. So first time we integrated ESG considerations into corporate governance code for commercial banks was in 2018. And in 2021, we amended this corporate governance code to better reflect this ESG related requirements here. And in 2021, it was the first time when National Bank of Georgia issued the corporate governance code for issuers of public securities. And ESG considerations is also part of that code. So what are the main requirements through corporate governance code? So first is that ESG, including climate, must be part of the entity strategy. And the ESG risk, again, including climate, should be incorporated into entities' overall risk management framework. So it should not be addressed separately, but it should be integrated into their overall risk management framework. And supervisory board is responsible for ensuring that this is done properly. So the governance is at the highest level. And another important requirement is that we introduce mandatory ESG disclosure requirements for commercial banks. This disclosure form, or ESG disclosure form, is also part of Basel III Pillar 3 reporting, annual reporting. So banks are disclosing ESG information as a part of Pillar 3 reporting. But another point I want to touch is that there is one thing when we say introduce regulations, but if we want to ensure that these regulations are well implemented in practice, we need additional guidance, we need additional support to provide to commercial banks because it's still a new topic, and without additional principles of guidance, we cannot be sure that this will be implemented properly in practice. So one of the first guidance that we developed was ESG reporting and disclosure principles, and we did this together with OECD back in 2020, together with ESG reporting forms. And banks are reporting using these forms, starting from 2021, and this is publicly available on our web page. So this ensures complete transparency. And next slide, please. Another thing I want to mention about these ESG forms is that we use the information that banks are disclosing within these ESG forms, not only to track progress, but also to see where is the weak points, where additional intervention is needed, additional support, additional guidance is needed within the financial sector. So this is very helpful and useful. And as I mentioned, we introduced ESG risk management requirement for commercial banks, but so far we have not provided any guidance or expectations from us what we expect banks to do in terms of ESG risk management. So currently we are working on guidelines for ESG integration through double materiality perspective, and this will cover not only traditional ESRM aspects, but it adopts a holistic approach, and it will provide guidance to banks how they need to do ESG risk management, both at loan level and portfolio level, and how they need to address these from double materiality perspective, meaning that they need to pay attention not only risk that like climate or other environmental factors posed to them, but also they need to address the impact they have on the environment and society. And these guidelines also include principles on climate risk management and also covers the governance part, or how what are main recommendations and on how banks should approach and this ESG integration and implement this in practice. So this is upcoming, and this will be published by end of this year. And next topic we are working under this pillar is climate-related risks. And one of the first reports we published on this was climate-related risk radar for Georgian economic sectors and its application for financial sector in 2022. So this is like to see what is the exposure of financial sector to high climate risk sectors. So this is like a scoring methodology that assigns climate scores to economic sectors, and then we look at the financial sector's portfolio to see what is exposure to high risk sectors. So again, this is published on our webpage, so if you're interested, you can take a look. So this is like a first step to do some analysis related to climate-related risks. But currently, we are having a project together with EIP to develop climate scenario analysis and stress testing framework for Georgia. It's an ongoing one, and we expect to have final results in February next year, because it's quite a complicated task to perform a climate scenario analysis and stress testing framework. So it takes more time than we expected, but again, there's a number of challenges related to methodology, related to data. In countries like Georgia, there are a lot of challenges related to Georgia that complicates this type of analysis. And we're also working on nature-related risks that's becoming more and more important internationally, because we all know that biodiversity and nature-related risks is becoming more evident, and it's again very important to see and analyze those risks. So we published this first working paper on biodiversity-related financial risks, where we tried to analyze what is the main dependencies and the impacts within the financial sector on biodiversity-related risks. We plan to continue working in this direction as well. So this is like main updates on risk side as well, and I haven't mentioned the fourth pillar, that is the awareness and capacity building, but it's also very important because we see like a real big progress in terms of awareness regarding sustainable finance and climate-related risks, especially in financial sector. But there's really still a big room for improvement, especially among non-financial companies. And the capacity, I guess, it still remains one of the biggest challenge in this regard. So we are trying to address and work on these issues as well. And last point I want to make is that all this won't be possible if without support that we get from our international partners, including OECD, IFC, EBRD, EIP, Sparkasse. I don't want to miss anyone. So big thank you from us to all of our partners who are supporting us in this journey. And and I guess I will stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salome. And there's one thing that I wanted to thank you for, is I understand that you actually may be in the US, on the other side of the ocean, if that's correct. So that means that it's pretty early over there. So really, we appreciate your commitment and the wish to be with us and share this work that is pioneering, I have to say. And Georgia, in this regard, is even maybe in the avant-garde of even the OECD countries. So that's really really important to see that the progress and the things can also be achieved here. So that's very, very appreciated and important. It also gives an inspiration to other countries. We've had discussions of this earlier, and then I see that there are attempts also to bring this experience and knowledge in the operations of central banks in other countries. So that's certainly very useful. I would like to ask if there are any specific comments, reactions to Salome's presentation, and especially maybe draw the attention to the fact that the taxonomy was an important part of this work. And we had an earlier discussion about the definitions, what we mean green finance, what is in, what's out. Certainly this work on taxonomies is very important to have the transparency, to have a clarity how we count the beans here in this context. So I don't know if you wish to maybe make a comment on this particular element, while then I'll ask if there are any other comments. But so Salome, if you could specifically respond to taxonomy issues.
Yeah, so again, because it was really important for us to understand what was the share of green loans in total portfolio. And also like to be able to track progress and like avoid greenwashing and have more clarity in the market, and also in the future design some supportive mechanisms how we can support further development of green finance market in Georgia. That's why it was really important for us to have a definition, because if we don't have definition, yeah, it's impossible to measure current situation or track progress, right? That's why that was one of the main motivations. We decided to develop a taxonomy. That was definitely not an easy job. It took us around like more than 2 years, around 2 years, and the involvement of various international and local stakeholders and experts to develop this taxonomy. But yeah, we are very happy about the result, and we hope that we will see more adoption in practice by financial sector, and that's what we're trying now to do, how to identify ways to support commercial banks to implement taxonomy and to issue green loans. And we are very actively working with commercial banks to support in technical work as well. We have very active communication. When they have questions related to technical criteria, we're always trying to help them in this regard as well. So we have very close and open communication with commercial banks, those who are working on implementation. Yeah, so we already see some results. So big banks are very committed and very set some ambitious targets for green loans. And now, like medium and small banks need to follow. So that's what we are trying to achieve in coming years.
Thank you very much. And then, unless there is another question from the floor, then I will. Yes, Nelly, go ahead.
Good morning, Salome, out there in New York. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for connecting, and thank you for the very good presentation. I have 2 small questions. In principle, the responses may be a bit longer, maybe, but when I hear you say that you're trying to create the regulations and the enabling environment and to push the financial sector, for example, deliver and provide more green loans, being on the supplier side, I would think that making more green loans available will also be a function of the demand that exists in the country, whether there is enough demand, because I think if there is demand, real demand for green investments and green lending products, there will probably be some increase. We will see an increase in supply from the banking sector. So my question is, do you think you can see an increase in demand in Georgia? This is the first one. And the second one, my second question is related. This is a kind of clarification question. If I understand correctly, you were doing this test and trying to assess the level of exposure of the banks to the, let's say, to the climate-related risks. And I understand this work seems to be ongoing. And my question is, if you have some initial already analysis, can you tell us what is the state of, what is the situation? Are most banks very highly exposed, or some banks are exposed? Some just give us some sense of the real state of affairs on the ground in this context. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So let me start with the first question, and challenges related to green loans. So one of the challenges is the lack of demand from the private sector. That's true. So the thing is, because there's no incentives from regulatory or government side on green loans, in most cases, it's like the conditions of green and regular loans is the same. But for green loans, companies need to provide additional documents. And the assessment takes additional time. So that's I guess one of the challenges, because then companies are not willing to do this for nothing, and because awareness among companies on the importance of green activities is still low. So these both combined results in low demand on green loans in Georgia. So that's why I think it's really important to have some kind of incentives for companies to take green loans, because then all the burden is on commercial banks, because they need to assess that these green loans are aligned with the taxonomy. So this is an additional work for them to show their green portfolio. And while some banks do understand the importance of showing how the share of their green portfolio and working on this direction, not all the banks are on the same page. But going forward, and with support, I guess we can expect to have increase in demand, because as a country, we have a number of international obligations, including NDC, Paris Agreement, and so on. And we now adopted a new low emission development strategy that includes net zero 2050. So all this requires shift in the way we operate, right, including companies. So all this means that more green projects need to be implemented in the country. And so there's a really big room for improvement in many directions in Georgia, because we are, I guess, in the starting phase to transforming to net zero or low emission economy. So there is really a big opportunity there in the both private and financial sector. As for the second question, so climate stress testing is an ongoing work. We more or less finished the first part, that is to selecting scenarios and transforming these scenarios to economic assumptions, like economic sector assumptions. If I'm not, so not to go into too much detail, but it's requires a lot of work to develop these tools or models or methodologies that we can use in this analysis. And now the next step here will be to use this input and stress the bank's balance sheet, and to see what's the real exposure of each individual bank to climate-related stress, and how they will perform under different scenarios. The first work and I suppose, a climate risk radar, and our first top-down top-down analysis on climate-related risk exposure in the Georgian commercial banks side. The report that I mentioned that showed that if I can see the so around 38% of commercial banks portfolio, but portfolio, not the whole portfolio, but loans issued to legal entities is exposed to high risk sectors. So this is quite a high number, and 30% is exposed, 31% is vulnerable or exposed to medium risk sectors. But this is the main message we wanted to make with this report was that there are climate-related high-risk sectors, and exposure is quite high, but it does not mean that every loan issued in these sectors are high-risk loans. This means that there might be some high-risk loans, and the commercial banks need to do in more depth detailed analysis to identify within these sectors which are high-risk companies and which are more less risky companies. So to use individual risk modifiers to adjust these results. So this is not very detailed analysis, but to have an idea what might be the exposure of financial sector to these high risk economic sectors.
Okay, thank you very much, Salome, and for those additional explanations, and also for the presentation, for the insights. Again, we congratulate Georgia for this work and the National Bank of Georgia. And as we said, it's an inspirational work. And then I hope that you won't mind if the participants will follow up with you and ask some questions how to do similar things in their countries. So thanks a lot. Have some rest then. Before then, you go to your morning meetings. Thank you very much. Now let's then move to our two last presentation, and the first one we will hear from Kazakhstan, and I hope our colleague Aygul Kusalieva is with us online. Let's hear if Aygul is connected.
Yep, hello, I'm here.
Yes, hello, Aygul. So thanks for being with us. Now we would like very much to hear from you about Kazakhstan green finance and regulatory initiatives in supporting of especially domestic capital market. Aygul is the Director of Sustainable Development at the Astana International Financial Center Authority. Aygul, the floor is yours.
Yep, thank you. May I share my slides myself, if that's possible?
I'm not sure. I don't know whether, because I don't see Mary. She is not here.
I'll go and check.
Yeah, but maybe we could start with the slides that are on the screen. You just say next, because and then we will switch.
I did some changes there, so I wanted to have those updated ones. And if you just can share the the organizer rights with me, I'll be able to share my slides here.
Oh, okay, that will take
while it's starting out.
Let's start, and then we will switch the slides.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me, and unfortunately I wasn't able to join you offline in Brussels, but it's very nice to see very many familiar faces within these 2 days, and I very much like most of the sessions, and especially those regarding the setting up the funds, national funds in countries, like the session which was earlier today. And going on to our topic, basically AIFC, there are a couple of slides actually explaining the role of financial center. I just want to provide some brief information about the financial center before I go to the topic of green finance. So the audience is kind of aware of what is the institution actually working on the ground on the green finance topic. So basically, Financial Center was set up as a separate jurisdiction within Astana city to develop the capital market. So EAFC has its own separate court arbitration center, and it operates on the common ground. Okay, I was just said that I can share the slides. Give me a moment, please. All right. Well, can you see the slides?
We see the slides, but we're not
Okay.
sure whether they're old slides or new slides. So that's a bit.
Anyway, so
maybe it'll take because actually I see something different. Yeah, I think this one is probably a new one. No.
All right. Okay. Good. So yeah, EAFC operates on the English common law, and we provide provide services to the participants of the financial center at the level of international financial centers and based on the English common law. And talking about the overall operations of the financial center, you can see on this slide basically what are the priorities, and you might see that green and sustainable finance is one of the directions for development of the financial center, and we did establish our own commitment to sustainable finance principles, and you see some highlights there. Along with sustainable finance, also Islamic finance and fintech are the priorities for the development of the financial center. And you can see on the left of the side of the slide, basic information about stock exchange, so type of products which are available on our exchange. And a few years ago, AIX also adopted the green bond guidelines for supporting the issuance of thematic instruments at the stock exchange, and the last year it was enlarged to the ESG bond guidelines, covering not only green but also social and SLBs. And also the platform actually provides a special, let's say, like a trading platform for retail investors. So basically, it's also one of the ways to provide this access to the capital market for retail investors in Kazakhstan. And talking about overall ESG finance, and I'll go deeper into green finance just in a moment. So Green Finance Center, which is a part of the AFC, was basically designed to develop a so-called green, or we now say sustainable capital market in Kazakhstan and the region. And basically what we've been doing so far is working on the policy side, on the product side, and we've been also working on the incentives for the market to tap. And we've been supporting actually the government and other entities in going to this market. So you can see the current initiatives include the taxonomy. So it was already covered in the previous conversations as well. So Kazakhstan adopted the green taxonomy in December 2021. And currently, a few years after that, we're working on amending the taxonomy to include more transitional, let's say, transitional activities to be in line with the new strategy of carbon neutrality of Kazakhstan. And you might see on the left the amount of the, let's say, like size of the sustainable finance market, and I will go deeper into that in next slides. And maybe here I just want to highlight those regional initiatives we are also, let's say, undertaking here in Kazakhstan. And I see that there are colleagues from Central Asia in the room. So I just want to elaborate here about the regional office of EaP in Central Asia. So Green Finance Center is also the regional office for green investment principles. And basically one of the directions we're working here is connecting the green projects of the region with the potential investors from EaP. So EaP is basically a framework agreement between financial institutions from China and those along the Belt and Road, which are interested in investing in green projects. So basically, we try to kind of, channel those projects which are in our region to those investors, sitting behind, let's say, the initiative. And if there is like any investment agencies in the room, I would also urge, let's say, to have maybe conversation on this topic separately after the event. And we've also been active in Kyrgyzstan, working on the development, let's say, ESG bonds. So we did provide a couple of external reviews for green and gender bonds in Kyrgyzstan. And last year, we've also been involved in development of model taxonomy for the Eurasian Economic Union, which was adopted in December last year. And we'll be also happy to share this document with other interested parties who will be looking into the development of regional taxonomies. And going to the overall Kazakhstan's experience on green finance and the policies we've been working on. So basically, the main document for the country right now is the carbon neutrality strategy, which was adopted last year. And basically the main idea and the main directions for the green finance in the country and also for AFC is actually mobilizing the investment for the for let's say like transitioning of the economy until 2060. So we have that we reached the neutrality by the time it was identified in the strategy. And the amount of investment basically needed for this goal is enormous, like more than $600 billion according to the document. And there is also timeline for, let's say, every 10-year of the investment needed. And the EAFC is basically working on, all the ways to mobilize the finance. And in fact, like what you need to mobilize the finance, you need the policies, standards in place. So it was very well discussed before that you need the standard to understand the classification, what is green and not green. And you need to have the incentives there and you need to have the products. So basically we're working in all these dimensions to make this happen. And as I mentioned about the green taxonomy, it was already adopted and currently we're working on the amendment, and hopefully by the end of this year, the Ministry of Environment will adopt the amendments, which will include the categories such as low pollution energy and then the generation of electricity based on gas. Then we'll also actually, let's say, including more categories, more, let's say, type of, let's say, standards which can be used for different type of projects, such as, let's say, green buildings, for instance, or hydropower, and etc. Basically, some of these projects will be in the taxonomy only until 2030, and after that, according to the strategy, most of the, let's say, energy production should be mostly coming from the renewables. And talking about the whole framework, those elements I just mentioned now. So basically, we do have the taxonomy right now in the place. We're updating it. And we have the market rules adopted at the stock exchanges. So as you may know, there are two stock exchanges in Kazakhstan, Kasey and Almaty, and also AIX. And maybe if you were aware of the recent address of the president, he was also mentioning the idea of, let's say, having the one stock exchange. So one system. And basically, we do have those guidelines, the frameworks on the both exchanges, and both exchanges actually provide these services with the reduced fees for the issuers of sustainable instruments. And the regulator in Kazakhstan also working on the guidelines for the ES risk management for the financial institutions. And we've been currently also starting the project on the ESG funds at the AFC. So basically, we hope that this framework will provide the ground, let's say, right, lays the ground for having the ESG fund registered with the AFC. And if we talk about the products, you will see later on the slides as well, we do have green bonds issued in Kazakhstan. We also have social bonds. And we're also working on the SLB bond, which we believe will be another important product for Kazakhstan, taking into account the type of the economy which is heavily relies on fossil fuels. So basically, those companies which were not able to issue the green bonds, SLB is the way to go for them, to make that transition happen. And if we talk about the incentives, along with the green taxonomy, we also initiated the subsidy scheme for green projects, which are being implemented by small and medium enterprises a couple of years ago. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the initiative has been now changed. So basically, the interest rate was 50%. So 50% discount of interest rate for green bonds, for green loans, sorry, and the coupon payment of the green bonds. But currently, if I'm not mistaken, the interest rate was fixed at 6%. So 6% both for the loans and the bonds, which are being issued by the small and medium enterprises for green projects in accordance with the national taxonomy. And I think it was also very well covered by Salome just now about the ESG disclosure, which is quite important for actually having the data in place to measure the success. And there is a ESG reporting guideline at AIX, at the stock exchange here at the AFC, and there's also ESG guidelines for companies listed at KASE. And also our financial regulator in Kazakhstan just recently adopted the guidelines on ESG reporting for financial institutions. Basically, starting next year, the reporting for the banks will be mandatory in Kazakhstan. And on this slide, you can see some benchmarking we did comparing the market of Kazakhstan with the peers, with the similar economies. And when we do this kind of analysis, we see that the amount, or let's say like market size of sustainable finance is comparatively higher in peer countries such as Chile, for instance, or Hungary. And if you dig deeper, you might understand that there are very large amount of sovereign green bond issuances, sovereign and municipal issuances in these countries. And for that reason, we also see that sorry, I'm jumping for my slides. And for that reason, we see that one of the priorities going forward and also meeting the target for carbon neutrality will be the actually issuance of sovereign green or sustainable bonds. And we also recently saw the change of the national legislation, which actually allows the municipality of Almaty to issue the municipal green bonds. And for basically boosting the market and providing this so much needed investment, we see that these type of instruments such as municipal and sovereign bonds will be one of those like next steps, for development of the market. And here's the snapshot of the market as of now. So it's more than $500 million. So that includes all the market of Kazakhstan since 2020, when the first green bond was issued. And you might see that, if I'm not mistaken, around 60 or 70% of the market is green finance instruments, which include both bonds and loans. And most of the issuers in the market are financial institutions, multilateral development banks, local financial institutions, and some of the quasi-state enterprises. And as I mentioned also in my previous slides, one of the priority instruments we are looking at now is SLB, sustainability-linked bonds. And we are observing now that one of the entities in Kazakhstan, Almaty Power Station, is actually already developing its sustainability-linked finance framework, which will be an instrument for them to actually issue the first SLB further. And you might see that the KPI they actually chose is related to the reduction of the CO2 emissions, and taking into account that the character of the overall, sustainable finance in Kazakhstan will be a transition finance. We see that this is the way for most of the companies in Kazakhstan, or let's say like emitters, to go, to fund the projects which will help them to transition. So I think that's all maybe from my side, if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Aygul. Again, this is a good example of very important and interesting development. And again, congratulations to this work, which was not easy at the start, but I see now the wheel is spinning much faster, and then there are very interesting developments. So that's very good, and thanks for sharing with us. I would like to ask if there are any questions from the floor to Aygul. Yes, there is one from Kyrgyz.
Aygul, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very glad to hear the progress of Kazakhstan. Yeah, by the way, I'm Azmat Timirkulov, Climate Finance Center under the Ministry of Natural Resources, Kyrgyzstan. So in your presentation, you mentioned about ESG bonds in Kyrgyzstan. I know that Kyrgyzstan recently issued green bonds, but that's first time I hear about ESG bonds in Kyrgyzstan. Probably we are preparing, and probably you are helping one of our banks to issue this. I don't know. So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. It's very nice to meet you. And fortunately, I'm not there to have these conversations going on, but hopefully we'll be in touch going further. But yeah, last year, actually, Asia Bank, or we call Asia Bank, right, issued the first gender bond, and Green Finance Center was providing its external review for that issuance. And the green bond was issued this year by the Credit Bank. And we're providing the external review for that issuance as well. So when I say ESG bond, it's like universe of all the bonds, which are called like social, gender or green, so thematic bonds or ESG bonds.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions from the participants? If not, I would like to thank you, Igor, for joining us, and certainly again, hopefully you won't mind if colleagues will follow up with some more questions on bilateral basis. Thank you, Igor.
Sure.
And now that will be our final presentation for the meeting, and I'm very happy to ask, actually, to see if my colleague from the OECD, Mohammed Safar, is online. Mo?
Hello.
Are you connected?
Krzysztof. Hi, everyone.
That's okay. Great. Thanks a lot for joining us online, and certainly we'll be very happy to hear from you the latest on mobilizing private finance in developing countries, and the latest because this is a very hot of the press report that has been developed very recently, and you have been an important author of that. That is showing the lessons learned from this particular topic of mobilizing private finance in developing countries. So Mo will be certainly very happy and looking forward to hear about those lessons learned, and then compare how those coincide, relate to what we've been discussing in the region of EU Eastern Partnership and Central Asia. So Mo, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Krzysztof. Good afternoon, colleagues, and apologies I wasn't able to join in person. So I'm going to speak to you, as Krzysztof says, about the mobilization challenge, building on Giorgio's excellent presentation on the state of international climate finance, but discussing a bit more, and I know this was a discussion of previous conversation, a bit more how we can better deploy international support to tap into private investment. So if I could have the next slide, please. Firstly, just very briefly on the global picture. I mean, this is a global challenge. Every country in the world needs to rapidly increase its investment in climate action. So that's across clean energy, sustainable land use, and of course, adapting to the impacts of climate change. The scale of the financing needs, as you can see here, 2.4 trillion a year in emerging and developing economies. That's across all climate action. And that stands in stark contrast to the current numbers currently being deployed to climate action, around 150 billion a year from all sources. So what that tells us is that we need to much more effectively tap into all sources of finance to fill the gap: public, private, international, and domestic. So really a large part of the challenge is how can we use the public to better and more effectively leverage the private. That's what we're not doing so well at the moment, as you can see from the numbers in the bottom left of this slide. So this is just in the context of climate finance provided by developed countries to developing countries. So it's a small subset of climate finance. It's not the whole picture, but the ratios, I think, are what's interesting. And of around 68 billion a year provided in the form of public climate finance from international sources, only 13 billion was mobilized by that. So we're seeing fractions. And really, we need to go from fractions to multiples. We should be talking about, public finance leveraging, many times more private finance. Of course, that's not possible in every geography or in every sector. But really, I think what this tells us is that at the moment, public finance is not doing a very good job of mobilizing the private. If I could have the next slide, please. So we need to deploy public finance much more strategically in the OECD, as well as some forthcoming work that we've got to be published over the next month or so that Krzysztof mentioned. We've developed over the past few years guidance on how public actors, both international and domestic, can do this. And we call this blended finance. So the formal definition is international development finance that's deployed strategically to leverage additional finance from other sources, namely the private sector. But these principles, I think, could equally apply to domestic actors themselves. So I'd like to just speak through them quickly. So we have a kind of step-by-step approach of how you should consider the deployment of finance in order to leverage commercial investment. So really the first step is to identify the development objective. What is it fundamentally that a project or a program is trying to achieve? For example, decarbonization, energy access, industrial development, all of the above. The reason this is important is because it provides a holistic assessment of desired impacts. So you're not just looking at what an individual project does in terms of its outcomes, but how it links to a country's wider economic development ambitions. And that in turn, I think, provides interesting insights on how you use public money and how much public money you should use and how concessional that money should be. If there's a very strong development case, and a very strong development imperative, then that provides a stronger case for use of more public money. The second and third steps are really to identify the financing gaps for projects and the barriers to investment. So the first question should be, can the private sector finance projects themselves? If not, why not? Are there economy-wide barriers, sectoral dynamics, project-specific risks that deter investment, and what exactly are they? So at the project level, those need to be identified in as much granularity as possible. Then that provides you a basis to identify the appropriate financing instruments that can help overcome these specific barriers, which I'll speak about a little bit more in the following slide, because I think that's probably of what's most interest. Then the next step really is that interventions need to be coordinated and anchored in the wider ecosystem. I think this was discussed in an earlier session. Are there policy reforms that need to happen to make projects work, as well as to address barriers to investment? Those can be economy-wide issues with investment codes or the fiscal regime, or they might be sector-specific issues to do with energy regulation. And it's really important that those are considered alongside individual projects. And then does technical assistance and capacity development need to be provided by the international community to help with this? Are there complementary projects that need to be financed? So, for large renewables projects, for example, you often need to develop transmission grids alongside them. But the commercial dynamics for generation might be different to transmission, so that they need different financing solutions. But all of these things, I think, need to be considered holistically. And finally, and this is really important. So this is step 6B, right at the bottom. Over time, how has the commercial picture evolved? If we've done our jobs properly, over time, projects should require less support from the public sector, and they should be able to stand on their own feet with commercial finance. So if that's the case, public support should be gradually withdrawn, so that it can be redeployed to new projects and sectors further along the commercial viability frontier. And really the constraint we're working in here is that public finance is limited. I should add a very important caveat, of course, that this isn't possible for every sector. There are, large areas where, natural monopolies or public goods can constrain the picture for commercial investment. Or you're talking about social goods where, you can't really depend on the private sector, health, education, etc. So, these principles aren't intended to be kind of applied to every single sector. I think that's why the initial assessment, can the private sector be involved, is really important. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'd like to expand briefly on steps 3 and 4. So identifying barriers to investment and the financing solutions to address them. So we've done some detailed work in the OECD looking at the specific barriers to investment facing clean energy, renewable power, energy efficiency, and other clean energy, including integration and green hydrogen. And what we tried to do was essentially identify some of the common barriers to investment across these sectors. So not the economy-wide barriers, not the general barriers to investment, but how do general barriers to investment interact with specific sectoral dynamics? So, for example, for smaller clean energy projects, rooftop solar or investments in energy efficiency, one of the key problems is scale. These projects are just too small to attract the interest of commercial investors, particularly foreign investors who don't have the interest or capacity to engage in small projects. And so, here, public finance can be used to support, for example, project standardization and aggregation and the creation of financing structures that basically group individual projects into securitized, rateable, and tradable assets. I apologize to the interpreters for all the jargon. For larger projects, on the other hand, one of the projects for investors is very long planning and construction phases, which expose them to political and regulatory risk. In these cases, political risk insurance can protect against breach of contract, as well as guarantees. Then for renewable projects, there are off-taker risks. So, can utilities continue to afford paying the agreed price for electricity, especially in cases where they're financially distressed? So in these cases, revenue guarantees can help shield investors. I won't bore you with all the different kind of barriers and solutions, but needless to say that we've done a bit of work looking at some of these across the energy sector. I think one thing I think that development practitioners need to do is expand this kind of analysis into other sectors. I haven't seen really detailed similar work for land use, for example. For the agricultural sector, what are the specific barriers there, and what kind of innovative financing solutions can be deployed to bring in commercial investment. Can I have the next slide, please? The final thing I want to say, and I'll keep this short, is just to say that these financing solutions really need to be anchored in a wider suite of measures and support. I think I mentioned this in the first slide. With strong coordination and strong institutional arrangements governing them. So, of course, the financial considerations and the financial assessments need to be done on a project-by-project basis. But, above that, what governments and donors and the private sector need to do is work together systematically. And, for example, governments need to make sure their intentions are clear through things like long-term strategies, which, the previous colleague set out so brilliantly in the case of Kazakhstan. Nationally determined contributions on climate change, national adaptation plans. Then underneath those, to set sector strategies. So, renewable phase-out dates or X% renewables by 2040, for example. And of course, greening their financial systems. And all of this, I think, provides, a real sense of clarity to investors that they're not only investing in individual projects, but these projects are anchored in a long-term vision, and that in turn provides a sense of certainty that if I put my money into this project, it's part of a much longer-term plan for the government. It's they're less likely to change their minds, and of course, critically, that it's backed by international support, and that the international support itself is also stable. Then at the project level, there's a lot of discussion about the need for strong project pipelines of investable projects, and to address policy and regulatory barriers facing specific projects, which I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, deploying finance strategically to de-risk them. So, yeah, really, the message here is, the system needs to work together. The international community, governments themselves, and the private sector, to really think holistically about all the different levers that need to be pulled in order to meet this challenge. So I'll leave it there. I know we're over time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mo. And this was really a very interesting overview of those challenges. I have to say that some of them, if not many of them, are something that we've discussed over the last 2 days. So that's very, very interesting.
Confirmation.
I don't know whether it's encouraging or disencouraging, but then it's the confirmation that the challenges are not different across the region. So that's that actually then maybe that kind of gives the signal that those are really the challenges that require special attention. And I think also from our discussions we're over time, actually now since this conference is trying to also to look what happened over the last several years, I think we've also seen that there are some signs of some of the challenges being addressed. So we have good examples of progress in those areas. So that was very interesting. And then I would like to open the floor and ask if there are any specific questions from colleagues here in the meeting room or indeed online. Are there any? Yes, there is one, please.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. I had a question around the fractions to multiples point that you made, in that private mobilization seems to be a very small ratio in comparison to the amount of public finance. Presumably, if providers of concessional capital put money into instruments which are more focused on private mobilization, they will be doing less of the things that they are currently doing. So what is it that public finance institutions and donors should stop doing or do significantly less of within climate finance? Presumably there are trade-offs in areas which don't have a mobilization focus. Thank you. And also just on the report that you're referencing, is that published yet, or just any details you can give on the source of information?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, of course, there are trade-offs, within climate and across broader development objectives as well. So that's a difficult conversation that I think providers, donors need to have. I mean, really, what I'm talking about here is one of the things that we see in our numbers is that the largest chunk of climate finance internationally goes to clean energy. Within that, the largest chunk is towards renewable power. Very little of that is mobilized private finance. Most of it is in traditional forms of kind of vanilla loans, right? What that doesn't account for is the changing dynamics of the sector over the past, 10, 15, 20 years. The rapidly evolving commercial dynamics that mean that you need less, in many jurisdictions, not all, of course, you need less public support. So really what we're talking about here is, not necessarily ceasing public support to, for example, clean energy, but, rather than spending $1 billion on financing an entire project with scarce public capital, what can you do to provide just enough public money to de-risk projects and then bring in private finance? And then, that might take, for argument's sake, 100 million. Now you've got 900 million to spend on other renewables projects or other development purposes. So it's really a smarter use of public money that we're talking about, and what that requires donors and governments to do is really look at the commercial dynamics in these sectors. I mean, one thing I would say is that that's not possible for everything. There are large parts of the climate sphere where the commercial dynamics are such that it's very difficult to attract private finance. Adaptation and resilience is one such area. I'm not saying there are no solutions, but it's more difficult. Land use and forestry is another tricky one. Again, there are commercial solutions, but it's not as simple to monetize as, say, a large renewable power plant. And then even within clean energy, there are elements of the system where you will need continued public support. But I'm rambling a little bit, but in sum, basically what we're talking about is a much smarter use of public money, so that you're not just throwing scarce public money into projects that could be financed by the private sector. On the sources, the material in these slides comes from two places. One is a forthcoming report that we're doing in the context of the the $100 billion goal for climate finance providers, which is looking at how well the 100 billion is doing in mobilizing private finance and what can be done to address it. So that's some of the messages that I've given are from that. That will come out at some point ahead of COP28, so over the next couple of months. The framework in the slides is from two sources. One is the OECD's blended finance guidelines, developed by our colleagues in the Development Cooperation Directorate, and OECD guidance on blended finance for clean energy. I'll share the links to both in the chat afterwards.
Thank you very much, Mo, and for this explanation. And actually, yes, you may have seen we had a presentation from Georgia from our colleagues from DCD. So that's certainly we already discussed the source of this information over there. So that's a good connection. I don't know whether Georgia, any comments on this side? No, it's okay. Good. Thank you. There is also a question here from our colleagues from Ukraine.
Thank you. Even though I don't know whom to address the question, but it kept me thinking from the previous presentations. If we are saying that local taxonomies are important to boost the green finance, how do we ensure the consistencies across local taxonomies? In reporting, for instance.
Depends what you mean by
Okay, I understand that when you say local, it's in each country.
Yeah, in each country, there should be local green taxonomy in place.
Okay.
But then, are they different, or how do we ensure that they are more or less similar?
Thank you. No, I think the question is very clear and very pertinent. So I know who from our panel would like to answer this question.
Online.
Aygul, I don't know whether Salome is still with us, but certainly this is an important question mentioning that. I'm certainly from the European, there is a taxonomy that has been developed at the European Union level, and it already is harmonized across all the member states. But certainly then when you go further to other countries, the European Union taxonomy has been providing an inspiration. So some countries could just take off the shelf and then apply, but then there may be some variations, and then there's a question of harmonization. Aygul, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So basically, the national taxonomy should take into account the practicalities of the economy of each country. So, for instance, if you take Kazakhstan, there is like a lot of priorities put on the renewables. And also, if you look at the thresholds, so for each type of the activity or the project, they should be aligned with the national legislation. So basically, I don't know if I can share my slides now, but anyway, so I was showing on my slides the projects regarding the green buildings. So before when the taxonomy was adopted a few years ago, we were putting in the threshold these international standards such as LEED or BREEAM, for instance. But currently, the local green building standards were actually emerging. And then these standards can be used instead of those international ones. And it's also about the cost. So when you want to when you want to apply for the international certification, it's quite costly. But if we talk about the local national standards, they are much more cheaper for the potential issuer of the green bond. So that's also the cost which they need to bear, in terms of the issuance. So for instance, when we put in the threshold these national standards, it makes life of the green bond issuer in Kazakhstan easier because he can adhere to the national standard, not to international one. And that goes for any other type of the project which will be in the taxonomy. So you need to have the localized criteria or localized standards the local issuer can adhere to, and also to reduce the cost of the issuer. And another interesting example, for instance, if you take example of Mongolia, so the Kashmir production in Mongolian economy is, I'm not sure exactly how much, but it's taking, I think, almost half of the economy of the country. So they put this sustainable textile or sustainable cashmere production in their national taxonomy as one of the, the type of the activities, because it's, taking most of the, well, let's say like, it's a very important type of the project or activity for the economy of Mongolia. So the specific country-specific particular like practicalities should be taken into account as well. So I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aigul. I don't know if any other panelists would like to answer this particular question, but from my side, I would say that if there is a problem or a question that is difficult to answer, yeah, look for an OECD publication, and then there is one actually that is exactly addressing this issue. There was a couple of years ago, it was OECD who's actually looked at taxonomies across the globe, so-called. So there is a discussion on comparisons between the EU taxonomy, the one applied in other countries, OECD member countries, and also outside in China, in other countries. So that's again, that'll be another link that will be shared with all the participants. So certainly you can read more about this. Okay, thank you. Are there any other? There is a question, yes, from Veronica, please. Moldova.
Thank you, colleagues, for presentations, very informative ones. I hope to have access to these presentations because a lot of information, valuable information, ideas are there. Congratulations. Colleagues, as an opinion or maybe experience if you have, can you mention some stories or examples of green fintech, maybe crowdfunding solutions based on green investments, and if anything related to crypto, because we can, it exists, we can not ignore it.
And again, I would ask our panelists to see if they are willing to answer those questions, because that's certainly those are the new challenges. We've had a pretty complex issues to address, including all the challenges that Mo listed, and then on top of it, then we have the new possible instruments, new available instruments that could be applied. So I don't know if there is anyone who would like to take this challenge from Moldova. Yes, okay. No, that's an important one, and then maybe we should keep this actually as a topic for another discussion, more in-depth discussion, because those are rather complex issues, but very important, I would say. Yes, there is. Oh, Mal has got an answer to this question, please.
No, I don't have an answer, but rather I have a question. Then, unfortunately, I don't know exactly to whom to address with the question. So what I have understood from today's presentations, there is ODA financing, which is could be accounted through this OECD database, and we can identify how much ODA funding goes for climate to a country. The second source of climate financing is private sector through private bank sector. That's accounted through taxonomy system that was presented. And third source, in my understanding, could be foreign direct investments. And I'm just thinking whether through which system this could be accounted, this source of financial flow. Can anybody answer this question?
Okay,
Yes.
another challenging one. Giorgio, would you like to?
So, but it depends what you intend. I mean, if you intend climate financing in the context of the Paris Agreement of the 100 billion, no? I mean, here you talk about also climate finance, this mobilized, it's provided and mobilized by public sources. So private, purely foreign direct investment from a private sector entity in one country that makes a direct investment in a private sector of the other country is not counted to this international goal. And it is anyway private finance, so it can be green, can follow certain taxonomies and so on, but it's different. It's out of the targets that are established at the international level.
Sure, Nelly, if you wish.
Sorry, I don't think I can really respond to this question. I think most of this data would come from, for example, sources like UNCTAD, UN trade people in some way. And maybe you would know also about this. From what I've seen, there is not really much data. I mean, FDI, you can find FDI flows, it's not that difficult. The issue for me is, and if I understand your question correctly, is whether we can speak about green FDI flows, right? And I think I personally haven't seen much on that. And I think it's a very important question, and it would be ideal to get this information. One way also, I mean, is to go to national statistical offices and try to get this data from the statistical offices, because they certainly keep an eye on how much money goes into the country, The question is that they would, again, have the general picture, but I don't think anybody for the moment in the statistical offices in the countries try to, or have at least even the methodology to distinguish between funds, that are for general investments and specifically a green investment type of, projects in the countries. And I think now that you are saying this, I think how right you are. And I think it's another area that we definitely need to think of and try to see what more we can do. Similarly to digitalization and green fintech, I think for us, these are new topics and new issues, and I think we need to put them on the radar, and because they're becoming more and more significant, and we should try to see what happens in these areas as well. I think it's a very good point. Thanks a lot.
This is exactly I wanted to hear from you, because I looked at the data, FDI data in Georgia, at statistical office data, and it was really difficult to identify which of these funds could be related to climate change, while these are important chunk of money, at least for Georgia. And we need to identify how much of this money goes to green lending, green fund, green projects, climate projects, and this is something to think about in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That's interesting. We said that it might be it is a very interesting topic to discuss. But just to recall that one of the very first conferences that I attended, which was already 30 years ago, was on foreign direct investment. But it was interesting enough related to the liability for past pollution in this context. So how the new the investors, they treat, and this was in the context of Poland, of some contaminated site without the responsible for the pollution. So that was an angle that we discussed at that time. But certainly from this perspective, there is a question as how how green the FDI is in terms of kind of the greenfield investment, so basically from the scratch, and then how not green could be, and then how the FDI can help the decarbonization of industry or manufacturing, or not. So certainly those are two elements. Okay, thank you very much. So I would like now to taking into account that we are getting close to the end of our meeting. So I would like to thank very much Giorgio, Salome, Aigul, and Mo for excellent presentations and insightful. Those presentations definitely will be shared with everyone, so you can we can all go through them again and then reflect on what has been said.